The moment I saw her crying in that hospital corridor, something inside my chest cracked open after 5 years of numbness. She was 20, broken, and beautiful in a way that made me forget I was supposed to be dead inside. I never imagined that helping a stranger would uncover a truth that would either destroy us both or save what was left of our shattered souls. Marcus Reed hadn't felt his heart truly beat in 5 years. At 52, the tech mogul had built walls so high around his emotions that even he had forgotten what lived behind them. His empire spanned 3 continents, his Manhattan penthouse overlooked Central Park, and his bank account could solve most problems with a phone call. But none of it mattered because Elena was gone, and with her, every reason he'd ever had to feel alive. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was visiting St. Mary's Hospital to check on James Morrison, his business partner, who'd suffered a minor heart attack during their latest board meeting. Marcus had built his fortune on reading people, understanding their motivations, predicting their moves. But he hadn't seen James's collapse coming, just like he hadn't seen the drunk driver who'd changed everything 5 years ago. As he walked through the sterile corridors after leaving James's room, Marcus felt the familiar weight of guilt settling on his shoulders. Everyone around him seemed to be breaking down, wearing out, falling apart, while he remained untouched by time or circumstance. Sometimes he wondered if he was cursed to watch everyone he cared about suffer, while he remained frozen in amber, preserved by wealth and isolation. That's when he saw her. She sat alone on a plastic chair in the pediatric waiting area, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face as she sobbed quietly into her hands. 20 years old, maybe younger, wearing scrubs that suggested she worked somewhere in the hospital, but something about her posture, the way she held herself, even in despair, spoke of devastation far beyond her years. Marcus stopped walking, his expensive Italian shoes silent on the polished floor. He'd seen plenty of grief in these halls over the years, visiting injured employees, attending charity events, writing checks to ease suffering he couldn't personally touch. But this was different. This girl's pain called to something buried deep in his chest, something he'd thought died with Elena. Her sobs were soft but desperate, the kind that came from someone who'd learned to cry quietly so as not to burden others. Marcus found himself studying the curve of her shoulders, the way her small hands shook as she wiped her eyes. She was beautiful in the way broken things sometimes are, sharp edges and fragile strength, like a piece of stained glass that had survived being shattered. "Excuse me," he found himself saying, his voice rougher than intended. The words surprised him. He hadn't spoken to a stranger about anything personal in years. "Are you all right?" Sophia looked up, and Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, red-rimmed from crying, but blazing with a fierce intelligence that took his breath away. There were flecks of gold in the gray, like lightning illuminating a thunderstorm. "Excuse me," he found himself saying, his voice rougher than intended. The words surprised him. He hadn't spoken to a stranger about anything personal in years. "Are you all right?" Sophia looked up, and Marcus felt the world tilt on its axis. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, red-rimmed from crying, but blazing with a fierce intelligence that took his breath away. There were flecks of gold in the gray, like lightning illuminating a thunderstorm. For a moment, neither of them spoke, caught in a recognition that neither understood. She studied his face with the intensity of someone used to reading people for survival. The silver threading through his dark hair, the expensive cut of his charcoal suit, the way he held himself like someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful men. But more than that, she saw something in his dark eyes that mirrored her own pain. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice cracked on the word like thin ice breaking under pressure. She straightened her spine, trying to pull herself together in front of this stranger who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. "You don't have to pretend to care." The bitterness in her voice surprised him, but he recognized the defense mechanism. He'd used similar armor for years, keeping the world at arm's length with politeness and money. "I'm not pretending," he said softly, and meant it in a way that startled him. Against every rational thought, against every rule he'd built for his careful, controlled life, Marcus sat down beside her on the hard plastic chair. The age difference felt enormous, inappropriate even, but something about her brokenness resonated with his own in ways he couldn't explain. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant and despair, but her presence made the sterile space feel almost alive. "I'm Marcus," he said softly, extending his hand. His fingers were long and elegant, she noticed, with a thin gold band on his ring finger that he still wore 5 years after Elena's death. "Sophia," she replied, shaking his hand briefly. His touch was warm and gentle, completely at odds with the commanding presence he projected. "I'm sorry you had to see me fall apart. I don't usually have public meltdowns." "Don't apologize," Marcus said, surprised by how much he meant it. "Sometimes the world demands more strength than we have." Sophia looked at him with new interest. Most people her age would have dismissed him as just another rich, older man, but she'd learned to see past surfaces. Tragedy had a way of teaching you to recognize kindred spirits. "You sound like you know something about that." "More than I'd like," Marcus admitted. There was something about her presence that made honesty feel possible again. "What's happening with your family, if you don't mind me asking?" Sophia hesitated, then seemed to decide that this stranger's kindness deserved truth in return. "My sister. She had another surgery today. Complications from an old injury that just won't heal properly." Her voice grew distant, the way people's voices do when they're remembering things they'd rather forget. "She was in a car accident 5 years ago. We lost our parents that day. And Maya, she's been fighting ever since." The words hit Marcus like ice water flooding his veins. Car accident? 5 years ago? His mind began calculating dates and possibilities, but he forced himself to push the thoughts away. There were thousands of accidents every year in the city. The odds of any connection were astronomical. But something cold settled in his stomach anyway. "You've been taking care of her alone all this time?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Sophia nodded, and Marcus saw the weight of the world in her young shoulders. She carried responsibility like a physical burden, the way he'd seen soldiers carry their packs, necessary but crushing. Someone has to. Maya's 15 now, but she needs constant medical care. The surgeries, the physical therapy, the medications, it never ends. She paused, looking at him with sudden suspicion that made her gray eyes flash silver. "Why do you care? You don't know me. People like you don't usually stop to comfort people like me." "People like me?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious. "Rich, powerful, important." She gestured at his suit, his watch, the way he carried himself. "You have better things to do than sit with a crying stranger." Marcus considered her words carefully. She wasn't wrong. The old Marcus, the one who'd existed before Elena's death, probably would have nodded politely and kept walking. But something about Sophia made him want to be better than he'd been. "Maybe I recognize the look," he said quietly. "Loss changes us, makes us older than we should be, gives us perspectives we never wanted." For a moment, something shifted between them. Recognition, understanding, an attraction that neither of them expected or wanted, crackling in the space between his expensive cologne and her exhaustion. Sophia found herself noticing the way his dark eyes seemed to hold secrets, the way his mouth was both kind and sad. Marcus noticed how she unconsciously straightened when she was nervous, how her intelligence shone through even when she was broken. "I should go," Sophia said, but she didn't move. Something about this man made her want to stay, want to trust, want to believe that kindness without strings attached still existed in the world. "So should I," Marcus replied, but his eyes never left her face. In her storm cloud gaze, he saw something he thought he'd lost forever, the possibility of feeling alive again. Neither of them moved. The hospital continued its endless rhythm around them, but for a moment, they existed in a bubble where age and circumstance and the weight of their separate griefs couldn't touch them. "Maya's going to be okay," Marcus found himself saying, though he had no basis for the promise. "How do you know?" Sophia asked. "Because she has you," he said simply, "and you're stronger than you think." The words settled between them like a bridge neither had expected to build. Sophia's world was held together by sheer willpower, caffeine, and a stubborn refusal to let the universe break what was left of her family. At 20, she'd already lived more lives than most people twice her age. By day, she worked as a receptionist in the same hospital where they'd first met, checking in patients and filing insurance forms with mechanical precision. Evenings found her serving tables at Romano's, an upscale restaurant where the tips could pay for Maya's medications. Nights were reserved for online tutoring, helping privileged teenagers with homework while Maya slept fitfully in the next room. Their apartment was a study in careful poverty, everything clean and organized, but worn thin by years of stretching every dollar until it screamed. Maya's medical equipment dominated the living space. A hospital bed that folded into a couch, oxygen tanks disguised as decorative pillars, pill organizers that covered half the Kid Adams counter like a pharmacological rainbow. But Maya's artwork transformed their small space into something magical. Paintings covered every available wall surface, explosions of color and life that seemed to mock their circumstances. Maya painted the way other people breathed, constantly, unconsciously, as if her soul would leak out through her brushes if she stopped. Her talent was undeniable, the kind that made teachers use words like prodigy and exceptional gift. But gifts don't pay medical bills, and exceptional doesn't fix broken bones that won't heal properly. Maya was everything to Sophia: purpose, responsibility, the one bright spot in a world that had tried to take everything from them. The car accident that killed their parents had left Maya with chronic pain, mobility issues that came and went like cruel weather, and medical needs that required constant vigilance. But Maya's spirit remained unbroken, fierce and creative, and determined to squeeze beauty out of every moment she was given. What Sophia didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the accident that had destroyed her family had also destroyed another family entirely. The truth slept in police files and insurance records, in newspaper clippings she'd never seen, and witness statements she'd never read. Marcus lived in a different universe entirely, one where problems could be solved with phone calls and money could insulate him from most of life's inconveniences. His penthouse apartment occupied an entire floor of one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of Central Park. The space was beautiful in the way museum exhibitions are beautiful, perfect, untouchable, lifeless. Elena's presence still haunted every room, though Marcus had never been able to bring himself to change anything after her death. Her books still lined the shelves, her coffee mug still sat in the cabinet, her side of the bed remained untouched, like a shrine to everything he'd lost. He'd built his life into a monument to grief, carefully preserved and utterly empty. His tech empire, Reed Innovations, had made him one of the youngest billionaires in the country before he turned 40. They specialized in artificial intelligence and machine learning, creating systems that could predict human behavior with startling accuracy. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent his career teaching machines to understand human nature while becoming increasingly disconnected from his own humanity. 5 years ago, Marcus had been married to Dr. Elena Reed, a trauma surgeon whose dedication to saving lives matched his own drive for innovation. She'd been everything he wasn't: warm where he was calculating, intuitive where he was analytical, emotionally open where he was guarded. Elena had a gift for seeing potential in broken things, for believing that anything damaged could be healed with enough patience and love. The night Elena died, she'd been driving to meet Marcus for their 7th wedding anniversary dinner. They'd planned to discuss starting a family, a conversation they'd been having for months. Elena wanted children desperately. Marcus had been hesitant, worried about bringing new life into a world that seemed increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. Elena never made it to dinner. A drunk driver ran a red light, sending a family's car careening out of control. Elena swerved to avoid a head-on collision that would have killed the other vehicle's occupants instantly, but her car hit a tree instead. She died on impact, the paramedic said. A hero's death, they called it, because she'd saved 3 lives with her sacrifice. Marcus had never wanted to know who Elena had saved. The knowledge would have destroyed him, he was certain. Better to keep her sacrifice abstract, noble but distant. Better not to put faces on the lives she'd traded her own to preserve. But guilt has a way of eating through even the strongest walls. Every success felt hollow, every achievement meaningless, because Elena would never see it. He'd tried therapy, tried travel, tried throwing himself into work until exhaustion numbed the pain. Nothing worked. He existed, but didn't live, went through the motions of a life without feeling any of it. The world had opinions about Marcus and Sophia from the moment they were photographed leaving the hospital together. It started innocently enough, Marcus offering to drive her home after a particularly difficult day with Maya, Sophia accepting because the subway seemed impossible after 18 hours without sleep. But tabloid photographers have a talent for turning innocent moments into scandalous narratives. "Tech mogul's midlife crisis," screamed the headlines. Photos of them walking together, him towering over her small frame, his expensive suit contrasting with her hospital scrubs. The stories wrote themselves. Wealthy older man, young beautiful woman, obvious gold-digging situation. His board members, led by the insufferable Richard Blackwood, called emergency meetings to discuss reputation management and brand protection. They used clinical language to describe something they saw as a weakness, a lapse in judgment that could affect stock prices and investor confidence. "She's younger than your nephew, Marcus," Blackwood had said during one particularly tense meeting. "This reflects poorly on your decision-making capabilities." Sophia faced different but equally brutal judgment. Her coworkers whispered behind their hands, assuming she'd found a sugar daddy to solve her financial problems. Patients' families looked at her with new suspicion, wondering if their vulnerable moments were being shared with her wealthy boyfriend. "I heard she's with that Reed guy now," she overheard Dr. Martinez saying to a nurse. "Smart girl, one rich boyfriend and all her problems disappear." The comments stung because part of Sophia worried they might be true. Marcus had started helping with Maya's medical bills despite her protests, had arranged for specialists and treatments they never could have afforded. Was she using him? Was her attraction real, or just gratitude disguised as love? But the real enemy wasn't society's judgment or professional consequences. The real enemy was the truth waiting in the shadows, patient and inevitable. Patricia Hoffman had been Maya's primary physician since the accident. She'd guided them through the worst of Maya's recovery, had watched Sophia transform from a terrified teenager into a fiercely protective young woman. Dr. Hoffman remembered everything about that night 5 years ago, the chaos in the emergency room, the family that lost 2 parents and nearly lost their youngest daughter, the woman who died saving them. When she saw the news coverage of Marcus Reed dating Sophia Adams, Dr. Hoffman's blood ran cold. She remembered the other victim from that night, the one whose sacrifice had made Maya's survival possible. Elena Reed had been a colleague, a brilliant surgeon whose death had devastated the entire hospital. Dr. Hoffman pulled the old files, her hands shaking as she confirmed what she'd suspected. Elena Reed had died saving Maya Adams and her parents. Only Maya had survived, and now Maya's sister was in love with the dead woman's husband. The cosmic cruelty of it was breathtaking. Here was love built on a foundation of unknowing grief, attraction rooted in a debt that neither party understood they owed. Some secrets, Dr. Hoffman knew, were too devastating to ignore, but some truths were too destructive to reveal. She watched Marcus and Sophia fall deeper in love, watched them find healing in each other's brokenness, and wondered if knowledge would save them or destroy them entirely. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Marcus found himself manufacturing excuses to visit St. Mary's Hospital daily. He told his assistant he was checking on philanthropic investments, told his board he was researching healthcare technology opportunities, told himself he was simply being a concerned friend to someone who needed support. The truth was simpler and more complicated. He couldn't stay away from Sophia. She tried to resist him, and he could see the internal war playing out behind her storm-gray eyes every time he appeared. The age gap was impossible to ignore. 32 years stretched between them like a chasm that made every shared moment feel stolen. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. His with corporate strategy meetings and charity galas, hers with double shifts and medical bills that never seemed to get smaller. But Marcus saw Sophia in ways no one else ever had. Not as a burden or a charity case, not as someone to be pitied or fixed, but as a woman of incredible strength and beauty whose intelligence shone even through her exhaustion. He admired her fierce protectiveness toward Maya, her refusal to accept help she hadn't earned, her ability to find humor even in the darkest moments. "You don't have to keep coming here," she said one afternoon as they sat in the hospital cafeteria sharing terrible coffee and even worse sandwiches. Maya was upstairs having physical therapy, and they'd fallen into a routine of meeting during her sessions. "I know," Marcus replied, studying her face. She looked tired but determined, the way she always looked. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but they were beautiful eyes, full of depths he wanted to explore. "Do you want me to stop coming?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Sophia could have said yes, could have ended whatever this was before it became something she couldn't control. Instead, she shook her head. "I don't understand what you want from me," she said quietly. "Men like you don't usually notice women like me unless they want something specific." "What do you think I want?" Marcus asked. Sophia's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. "I don't know. That's what scares me." Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to something intimate and honest. "I want to know what you're thinking when you get that little line between your eyebrows. I want to know why you always order your coffee black, but put 3 sugars in it when you think no one's looking. I want to know what makes you laugh, what makes you cry, what you dream about when you're not taking care of everyone else." The intensity in his voice made Sophia's breath catch. "Marcus, I want to take care of you the way you take care of everyone else," he continued. "Not because you need saving, but because you deserve to be cherished." The word cherished hit Sophia like a physical blow. No one had ever used that word about her before. She'd been needed, depended on, occasionally appreciated, but never cherished. "Let me help with Maya's medical bills," Marcus said, not for the first time. "Let me do something useful with all this money that doesn't mean anything to me." "No." Sophia's response was immediate and fierce, the same answer she'd given every time he'd made the offer. "I don't need your money." "It's not about need," Marcus said, reaching across the table to catch her hand gently. "It's about want. I want to help you. I want to make your life easier. I want to do something good with resources I never earned and don't deserve." The touch sent electricity shooting up Sophia's arm. His hands were larger than hers, soft from a life of privilege, but strong in ways that made her feel protected. She looked down at their joined fingers, noting the contrast between his expensive watch and her chipped nail polish. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you make me feel alive again," Marcus admitted, the words surprising him with their honesty. "Because for the first time in 5 years, I wake up wanting to see what the day will bring, instead of just surviving until it's over." The confession settled between them like a bridge, connecting their separate islands of grief and hope. Maya's recovering progressed slowly but steadily, and Marcus found himself becoming part of their small family unit in ways that felt natural and right. He brought Maya art supplies and books, listened to her stories about school and friends with the patience of someone who genuinely cared about her answers. He helped Sophia navigate insurance paperwork and medical bureaucracy with the kind of casual expertise that came from having resources and knowing how to use them. But more than that, he brought laughter back into their lives. Marcus had a dry sense of humor that caught Sophia off guard, making her snort with amusement at unexpected moments. He told stories about business meetings gone wrong and corporate politics that sounded like elaborate comedy sketches when filtered through his sardonic perspective. The kiss happened during a thunderstorm that rolled over the city like divine judgment. Sophia had always been terrified of lightning, a phobia that dated back to childhood but had intensified after the accident that killed her parents. Thunder and lightning had been the soundtrack to that awful night, and storms still sent her into near panic attacks. She was working late at the hospital when the weather turned violent, staying to help with overflow patients from a multi-car accident on the highway. Marcus had been in meetings across town, but came to find her when he heard about the storm, knowing how it would affect her. He found her huddled in a supply closet, trying to control her breathing as thunder crashed overhead like artillery fire. The sight of her curled into herself, shaking with fear, made something protective and fierce rise in his chest. "Sophia," he said softly, kneeling beside her, "I'm here." She looked up at him with eyes wide with terror and embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I know it's stupid, but I can't. The sound." "It's not stupid," Marcus said firmly, sitting beside her in the cramped space. "Fear doesn't follow logic." When the next flash of lightning illuminated the small room, followed immediately by thunder that seemed to shake the building, Sophia instinctively moved closer to him. Marcus wrapped his arms around her, and suddenly they were pressed together in the darkness, her face buried against his neck, his hand stroking her hair. "I've got you," he murmured against her temple. "You're safe." She lifted her head to thank him, and suddenly they were breathing the same air, their faces inches apart. The next kiss was inevitable, natural as breathing, desperate as drowning. It started soft and questioning, Marcus giving her every opportunity to pull away, but when she kissed him back with 5 years of stored loneliness and hunger, gentleness gave way to something more urgent. They kissed like people who'd been lost and had finally found their way home. Sophia's hands fisted in Marcus's expensive shirt, pulling him closer, while his fingers tangled in her dark hair. The storm raged outside, but inside their small sanctuary, nothing existed except the taste and feel of each other. When they finally broke apart, both were shaking for reasons that had nothing to do with thunder. "This is crazy," Sophia whispered, her lips still tingling from his kiss. "I know," Marcus said, but he kissed her again anyway, softer this time, like a promise. The guilt hit Marcus that night like a physical blow to the chest. As he lay in the bed he'd shared with Elena, Sophia's taste still on his lips and her scent still clinging to his clothes, he felt like the worst kind of traitor. Elena's photograph smiled at him from the nightstand, beautiful and kind and forever frozen at 35. She'd been everything good in his world, everything pure and hopeful and worth protecting. How could he be falling in love when she was gone because of her own goodness? How could he be building happiness on the foundation of her sacrifice? The rational part of his mind knew that Elena would have wanted him to move on, to find love again, to build a life that honored her memory without being imprisoned by it. She'd always been generous with her love, believing that the heart's capacity was infinite rather than finite. But rationality had little power over the crushing weight of survivor's guilt. Marcus spent the next week avoiding Sophia's calls, canceling their coffee meetings, finding reasons to stay away from the hospital. When she finally cornered him in the parking garage after visiting hours, her eyes were blazing with hurt and anger that made his chest ache. "If you're done with me, just say so," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill. "Don't make me chase you like some pathetic child who doesn't understand when she's being dismissed." The pain in her voice cut through him like a blade. "Sophia, it's not what? Not what you want? Not what you expected? Not worth the trouble?" Her voice rose with each word, 5 years of abandonment and disappointment pouring out. "I knew this was too good to be true. I knew someone like you couldn't really want someone like me." It's not that simple, Marcus said, his voice strained with the effort of not reaching for her. It is that simple, Sophia shot back. Either you want me or you don't. Either what happened between us meant something or it didn't. Either you're brave enough to see where this goes or you're too much of a coward to try. The word coward hit him like a slap. I want you, he said, the words torn from his chest. God help me, I want you so much, it's destroying me. That's the problem. Sophia stepped closer, and he could smell her shampoo, could see the flecks of gold in her gray eyes. Then what's stopping you? She's dead because she was good, Marcus said quietly. Elena died saving people she didn't even know because that's who she was. How can I be happy when her goodness is the reason she's gone? Understanding dawned in Sophia's eyes, followed by something that looked like heartbreak. You think loving me betrays her memory. I think I don't deserve to move on when she can't. That's not your choice to make, Sophia said fiercely. You don't get to decide that your life should end because hers did. That's not love, Marcus. That's just selfishness disguised as loyalty. The truth in her words hit him like cold water, but the guilt was too strong, too deeply rooted to be dislodged by logic. I can't, he said finally. I'm sorry, but I can't. Sophia stood there for a long moment, studying his face like she was memorizing it. When you're ready to stop punishing yourself for surviving, she said quietly, you know where to find me. She walked away without looking back, leaving Marcus alone in the parking garage with the sound of her footsteps echoing off concrete walls and the weight of his cowardice crushing his chest. 2 weeks of silence stretched between them like a wound that wouldn't heal. Marcus threw himself into work with the desperate intensity of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. But every meeting felt meaningless, every decision hollow. He'd catch himself reaching for his phone to text Sophia, only to remember that he'd forfeited that right when he'd chosen fear over courage. Maya's condition took a turn for the worse during those 2 weeks, not physically, but emotionally. She missed Marcus with the straightforward honesty of adolescence, asking Sophia daily when he was coming back, why he'd stopped visiting, if they'd had a fight. He's busy, Sophia would say, the lie sitting bitter on her tongue. Too busy for us? Maya would ask, and Sophia never had a good answer. The breaking point came when Maya had a setback that required emergency surgery. Sophia sat in the same waiting room where she'd first met Marcus, remembering his kindness, his steady presence, the way he'd made her feel less alone in the world. When the surgery stretched into its 8th hour with no updates, she finally cracked and called him. Marcus answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. Maya's in surgery, Sophia said, without preamble, her voice rough with exhaustion and fear. There were complications with her latest procedure. I can't do this alone anymore. I'm on my way, Marcus said, and the line went dead. He arrived 20 minutes later, still wearing his tuxedo from some charity gala he'd left without explanation. Sophia looked up as he approached, taking in his perfectly styled hair, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck, the way he moved toward her like she was the only person in the world who mattered. Any news? He asked, sitting beside her in the same chairs where they'd first met. Not yet, Sophia said. Marcus, I'm sorry I called. I know you don't want... Stop, he said firmly. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unfinished conversations hanging between them. I made a mistake, Marcus said finally. Walking away from you was the stupidest thing I've ever done, and I've made some spectacularly stupid decisions in my life. Sophia turned to look at him fully. What changed? I realized that Elena would be furious with me, he said with a small, sad smile. She always hated it when I let fear make my decisions. She used to say that love wasn't meant to be safe or easy or convenient. She said it was meant to transform us. Smart woman, Sophia said quietly. The smartest, Marcus agreed. She would have loved you, you know. She had this thing about broken people. She could never resist trying to fix them. "I don't need fixing," Sophia said, a warning edge in her voice. "No," Marcus agreed, "you don't, but I do. And somehow, being with you makes me want to be better than I've been." Before Sophia could respond, Dr. Martinez emerged from the surgical suite with news that Maya's operation had been successful. The relief that flooded through both of them was immediate and overwhelming, and without thinking, they fell into each other's arms. That night, as Maya recovered in her room, Marcus and Sophia talked until dawn broke over the city. They sat in the hospital cafeteria as the early shift arrived, sharing terrible coffee and tentative hope. "I want to try this," Marcus said as the sun painted the windows gold. "I want to see what we could be together." "Even though I'm 20 and you're 52? Sophia asked. "Even though," Marcus confirmed. "Even though people will judge us and make assumptions and probably say terrible things about both of us? Even though? Even though it scares you?" Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "Especially because it scares me. Elena used to say that anything worth having was worth being afraid for." Sophia squeezed his fingers. "I love you," she said, the words simple and true. "I love you too," Marcus replied, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt like he was really alive. Dr. Patricia Hoffman watched the reunion between Marcus and Sophia with growing unease. She'd kept her knowledge about their connection secret for months, hoping that their relationship would burn out naturally, that the age difference and different worlds would drive them apart before anyone had to confront the devastating truth. But now, seeing them together in Maya's room, watching Marcus read to the teenager while Sophia slept in the chair beside them, Dr. Hoffman realized that their connection was deepening rather than fading. Love had taken root, and with it, the potential for destruction on a scale that made her stomach churn. She pulled the old files again, spreading them across her office desk like pieces of a puzzle she wished she'd never had to solve. Elena Reed's death certificate, dated 5 years ago to the day. Maya Adams' admission records from the same night, documenting injuries sustained in a vehicular accident. Police reports that mentioned Elena Reed's heroic sacrifice, swerving to avoid a collision that would have killed 3 members of the Adams family. The irony was devastating and perfect in its cruelty. Elena had died saving Maya, and now Maya's sister was in love with Elena's widower. It was like some cosmic joke, a twist of fate so improbable that it felt designed by a universe with a sick sense of humor. Meanwhile, Maya herself began to notice things that her conscious mind couldn't quite piece together. She'd started having dreams about the accident, something that hadn't happened in years. In her dreams, she could see a woman's face in the moments before impact, someone with kind eyes and dark hair who looked familiar in ways Maya couldn't explain. "Do you ever dream about that night?" Maya asked Sophia one afternoon as Marcus was helping her with physical therapy exercises. "Which night?" Sophia asked, though she knew exactly what Maya meant. "The accident, when Mom and Dad died." Sophia's hands stilled on the insurance forms she'd been filling out. They rarely talked about that night directly. It was too painful, too raw, even after 5 years. "Sometimes. Why?" "I keep seeing this woman," Maya said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "She's in a car that's about to hit us, but then she turns away at the last second, like she chose to crash into something else instead of us." Marcus's hands froze on Maya's leg brace. He looked up at Sophia, seeing his own sudden dread mirrored in her eyes. "Dreams aren't always literal, sweetheart," Sophia said carefully. "Sometimes our minds create images to help us process trauma." But the seed of truth had been planted, and it would grow whether they watered it or not. Dr. Hoffman knew the anniversary was approaching, 5 years since the accident that had connected their lives in ways none of them understood. She found herself marking the calendar with growing anxiety, knowing that grief had a way of surfacing on significant dates, knowing that truth had a way of demanding recognition. She watched Marcus during his visits, noting how he sometimes grew distant and melancholy without apparent reason. She saw how he touched the wedding ring he still wore, how his eyes would sometimes focus on something far beyond the hospital walls. Anniversary reactions were common among trauma survivors. She'd seen it countless times in her practice. What she hadn't expected was to see the same behavior in Sophia. The second crisis began with a phone call that shattered the fragile peace they'd built. Maya collapsed during art class at school, her chronic pain flaring into something so severe that it required immediate hospitalization. Sophia received the call while at work, and by the time she reached the hospital, Maya was already being prepped for emergency surgery to address complications from her previous procedures. Marcus arrived within minutes of Sophia's frantic call, using his connections to mobilize the best surgical team available. He arranged for specialists to fly in from Johns Hopkins, covered expenses without question, navigated the medical bureaucracy with the kind of casual efficiency that only unlimited resources could provide. But as he sat in the waiting room where their story had begun, watching Sophia pace like a caged animal, guilt began eating through his chest like acid. Was he trying to save Maya, or was he trying to save himself? Was his love for Sophia real, or just another form of penance for surviving when Elena hadn't? The surgery lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of fluorescent light and terrible coffee, of Sophia's silent tears and Marcus's growing internal torment. When Dr. Martinez finally emerged with news that Maya would recover but would need months of intensive rehabilitation, relief should have been their primary emotion. Instead, Marcus felt like he was drowning. "Thank you," Sophia said to him as they stood outside Maya's recovery room. "I don't know what we would have done without you. The specialists, the private room, the everything. You saved her life." The gratitude in her voice felt like a knife between his ribs. Anyone would have done the same thing. "No," Sophia said firmly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have offered thoughts and prayers and maybe sent flowers. You moved mountains." Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. "I have resources. It's not heroic to use them." "It is when you don't have to," Sophia said. "It is when you could have chosen to stay safe and distant instead of getting involved with someone else's mess." The word mess hit him like a physical blow. Is that what they were to him? Someone else's mess that he was trying to clean up to assuage his own guilt? "Sophia," he began, but she was already reading something troubling in his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Maya's going to be okay. The worst is over." But Marcus couldn't escape the feeling that he was profiting from tragedy, that his love for Sophia was somehow built on the foundation of other people's suffering. Maya's pain had brought them together, had created opportunities for him to play hero, had given him a way to feel useful and needed and good about himself again. "I need some air," he said abruptly, leaving Sophia standing alone outside Maya's room with confusion and hurt written across her face. The confrontation came 2 days later when Sophia found Marcus in his office at Reed Innovations. She'd taken time off work to stay with Maya, but when Marcus stopped returning her calls and failed to visit the hospital, she decided to bring the fight to him. "She's asking for you," Sophia said without preamble, standing in his office doorway like an avenging angel. "Maya wants to know where you are, why you haven't come to see her." Marcus looked up from his computer, and Sophia saw exhaustion and something that looked like self-loathing in his dark eyes. "How is she?" "She's 15 years old and scared and in pain, and the man she's come to think of as family has disappeared without explanation," Sophia said, closing the door behind her. "How do you think she is?" "I'm not her family," Marcus said quietly. "The hell you're not," Sophia shot back. "You've been there for every appointment, every surgery, every milestone for months. You've made her laugh when she wanted to cry. You've listened to her dreams and fears. You've been more of a father figure to her than anyone since our dad died. Of course you're family." The word father made Marcus flinch visibly. "That's not. I can't be that for her." "Why not?" Sophia demanded. "Because you might actually have to commit to something real? Because you might have to stop hiding behind your guilt and start living again?" "You don't understand," Marcus said, standing and moving to the window that overlooked the city. Every time I help you, every time I solve a problem or pay a bill or make things easier, I feel like I'm buying something I don't deserve." Sophia stared at him. "Buying what?" "Absolution," Marcus said quietly. "Redemption. A way to feel good about myself when I have no right to feel good about anything." "That's bullshit," Sophia said flatly. "You think helping us is some kind of transaction? You think my love is something you can purchase with medical bills and specialist consultations?" "Isn't it?" Marcus asked, turning to face her. "Would you even look twice at me if I couldn't solve your problems? If I was just another ordinary man with nothing to offer except ordinary love?" The question hung between them like a blade. Sophia felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been carefully built and tenderly protected. "I can't believe you just asked me that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Answer it," Marcus said, his own voice rough with pain. "If I was a teacher or a mechanic or a store clerk, if I couldn't pay Maya's medical bills or arrange for specialists or make your life easier, would you love me?" Sophia looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the confident businessman, but a broken man who'd convinced himself that he could only be loved for what he could provide rather than who he was. "I fell in love with you in a hospital waiting room when I thought you were just another visitor," she said finally. "I fell in love with your kindness, your intelligence, your dry sense of humor, the way you listened to Maya's stories like they were the most important things you'd ever heard. I fell in love with the man who sat with a crying stranger because he recognized her pain." She paused, wiping tears from her cheeks. "But if you think I'm with you for your money, if you think my feelings are some kind of elaborate con game, then you don't know me at all. And maybe I don't know you either. Sophia." "No," she said, moving toward the door. "I can't be with someone who thinks so little of me. I can't love someone who thinks so little of himself. When you figure out whether you want to be Marcus the man or Marcus the bank account, call me." She left him standing in his office, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt like prison bars, with the taste of regret burning his throat and the sound of her footsteps echoing in his ears like a countdown to something ending. The truth came out on the 5th anniversary of Elena's death, as if the universe had been waiting for maximum dramatic impact. Marcus had spent the morning at Elena's grave, a ritual he'd maintained for 5 years, bringing white roses and spending an hour talking to a headstone that couldn't talk back. He told Elena about Sophia, about Maya, about the love that had grown in the space where his heart used to be. He talked about his guilt, his fear, his confusion about whether moving forward meant leaving her behind. The conversation was one-sided, but it had become a necessary part of his grieving process. What Marcus didn't know was that Maya had chosen the same day to research the accident that had killed her parents. 5 years of therapy had finally given her the emotional tools to confront her trauma directly, and her therapist had suggested that understanding the details might help her process her survivor's guilt. Maya started with newspaper archives, searching for coverage of the accident that had changed her life. What she found made her blood run cold. "Local doctor dies saving family in traffic accident." The headline was accompanied by photos, the wreckage of 2 cars, one wrapped around a tree, the other damaged but intact. But it was the photo of Dr. Elena Reed that made Maya's world tilt on its axis. She knew that face. She'd seen it in her dreams, in the fragmented memories that had been buried under years of trauma and recovery. The woman who had swerved to save them, who had chosen death over allowing their car to be hit head-on. With shaking hands, Maya read the article that detailed Elena's heroic sacrifice. Dr. Elena Reed, trauma surgeon at St. Mary's Hospital, had been driving to meet her husband, Marcus Reed, for their anniversary dinner when she witnessed an out-of-control vehicle heading directly toward another car carrying a family of 3. Reed swerved her vehicle to prevent what would have been a fatal collision, witnesses reported. Her actions saved the lives of David Adams, 45, Susan Adams, 43, and their daughter, Maya Adams, 10. Reed died on impact when her car struck a tree. Maya stared at the article until the words blurred together. Marcus Reed. The Marcus who'd become like family to them, who'd paid for her surgeries and listened to her dreams and made Sophia smile again. The husband of the woman who died saving her life. The cosmic cruelty of it was breathtaking. Her sister was in love with the widower of the woman who died for Maya's survival. Maya printed every article she could find, her hands shaking as the full scope of the connection became clear. Elena Reed had been a hero, a brilliant surgeon whose death had devastated the medical community. Marcus Reed had become a recluse after his wife's death, emerging only recently in tabloid photos with a young woman identified as Sophia Adams. Sophia Adams, survivor, sister of the girl Elena Reed had died to save. When Sophia returned from work that evening, she found Maya sitting at their kidams table surrounded by printouts, her face pale with shock and grief. "What's all this?" Sophia asked, though something cold was already settling in her stomach. "The truth," Maya said quietly, "about the accident, about why Mom and Dad died and I didn't." Sophia picked up one of the articles, and her world exploded. Elena Reed's face smiled at her from a newspaper photo, beautiful, kind, forever frozen at 35. The woman Marcus had loved and lost, the woman whose memory he'd struggled to honor, the woman whose death had created the guilt that nearly destroyed their relationship, the woman who died saving Maya's life. "Oh, God," Sophia whispered, sinking into a chair. "Oh, God, oh, God, oh, God." "He knows, doesn't he?" Maya asked. "Marcus knows that his wife died because of us." Sophia couldn't answer. Her mind was reeling, trying to process the implications. Every kindness Marcus had shown them, every bill he'd paid, every gentle touch and whispered endearment, had it all been motivated by obligation, by guilt, by some twisted sense of debt to Elena's sacrifice? Sophia confronted Marcus that same night, storming into his penthouse with the newspaper articles clutched in her shaking hands. She'd used the key he'd given her weeks ago, back when their relationship felt like something beautiful and real, instead of a lie built on tragic coincidence. Marcus was sitting in his study, Elena's photo on the desk beside him, looking older than his 52 years. When he saw Sophia in the doorway with the papers in her hands, something in his face crumbled. "You know," he said. It wasn't a question. "Did you?" Sophia asked, her voice barely controlled. "When you first saw me in that hospital, when you sat down beside me and offered comfort, did you know who I was?" "No," Marcus said immediately. "I swear to you, I had no idea." "When did you figure it out?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I suspected something when you mentioned the accident, the timing, the details, but I didn't want to know for certain. I told myself the odds were impossible." "But you knew?" Sophia pressed. "At some point, you knew, and you didn't tell me." "I was afraid," Marcus admitted. "I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd leave. I was afraid that our love would be destroyed by something that happened before we ever met." "Our love?" Sophia laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "What love, Marcus? This whole thing has been built on lies and guilt and obligation. You've been taking care of us because you felt like you owed Elena's memory some kind of debt." "That's not true," Marcus said, standing and moving toward her. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with Elena's death." "Doesn't it?" Sophia challenged. "Doesn't it all make sense now? The grieving widower who can't move on meets the sister of the girl his wife died saving. It's like the universe handed you a way to ease your guilt and feel heroic at the same time." "You're wrong," Marcus said desperately. "My feelings for you are real. They've always been real." "Are they?" Sophia asked, tears streaming down her face. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been playing out some elaborate fantasy where you get to save us the way Elena saved Maya. You get to be the hero instead of the survivor." The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow, because there was truth in it, uncomfortable and undeniable. Part of his love for them had been motivated by a desire to honor Elena's sacrifice, to make her death mean something positive. "Maybe it started that way," he said quietly. "Maybe guilt brought us together, but what I feel for you now has nothing to do with Elena's death and everything to do with who you are." "I can't tell the difference anymore," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "Every time you've helped us, every problem you've solved, every time you've made our lives easier, was it love or was it penance?" "Both," Marcus said honestly. "Maybe it was both, and maybe that's not entirely wrong. Maybe love and healing and moving forward are all connected in ways we don't understand." But Sophia was beyond hearing reason. The revelation had shattered something fundamental in her understanding of their relationship. Every memory was now suspect, every moment of happiness tainted by the possibility that it had been motivated by guilt rather than genuine feeling. "I can't look at you without seeing her death," Sophia said, the words cutting through him like a blade. "Every time you touch me, I'll wonder if you're thinking about the woman who died so Maya could live. Every time you say you love me, I'll wonder if you're really talking to Elena's ghost. Sophia, please." "And you," she continued, her voice rising with 5 years of buried pain, "you can't look at me without seeing your guilt and obligation. You can't love me without feeling like you're betraying her memory or honoring it or some complicated mess of both." The truth in her words was devastating because it reflected fears Marcus had been carrying but hadn't been brave enough to examine. "I need you to leave," Sophia said quietly. "I need you to stay away from us while I figure out what's real and what's just trauma and guilt dressed up as love." "What about Maya?" Marcus asked desperately. "She needs continued medical care, specialists, treatments." "We'll figure it out," Sophia said, though the words felt like broken glass in her throat. "We were surviving before you came along. We'll survive after you're gone." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face in case it was the last time he'd see it clearly. "I love you," he said quietly. "Whatever else you believe, whatever else you doubt, please believe that what I feel for you is real." "I don't know what's real anymore," Sophia replied. "That's the problem." The aftermath of the revelation was devastating for both of them, but in different ways. Sophia threw herself into research about the accident, reading every article, every police report, every witness statement she could find. She needed to understand exactly what had happened that night, needed to know every detail of Elena's sacrifice. What she found was a woman who'd been genuinely heroic. Elena Reed had been beloved by her patients, respected by her colleagues, devoted to her husband. She'd died instantly upon impact, the coroner's report stated, which meant she'd had only seconds to make the decision that saved Maya's life. The weight of that sacrifice felt crushing. How could Sophia build happiness on the foundation of someone else's death? How could she love the man Elena had left behind without feeling like she was stealing something that didn't belong to her? Maya's reaction was different but equally complex. She felt survivor's guilt on a scale she'd never experienced before, knowing that a brilliant doctor had died so she could live. But she also felt angry at Sophia for pushing Marcus away when they all needed each other. "She chose to save us," Maya said during one of their arguments. "Elena chose to swerve. She chose to sacrifice herself so we could live. Doesn't that mean we have an obligation to actually live instead of just surviving?" "It's not that simple," Sophia replied. But Maya's words planted seeds of doubt about her decision to end things with Marcus. Marcus's response was to retreat into complete isolation. He stopped going to the office, stopped taking meetings, stopped engaging with the world in any meaningful way. His assistant fielded calls and rescheduled appointments while he sat in his penthouse staring at Elena's photo and trying to untangle the mess of guilt and love and grief that had become his life. Without Marcus's financial support, Sophia and Maya faced immediate practical consequences. Maya's medical bills piled up quickly, and Sophia found herself working longer hours to cover expenses they'd grown accustomed to having handled. The stress affected Maya's recovery, which affected Sophia's emotional state, which created a downward spiral that seemed impossible to escape. But the worst consequence was the silence. After months of daily contact, the absence of Marcus from their lives felt like a death. Maya grieved for him openly, asking daily when he was coming back, whether Sophia missed him, if there was any way to fix what had been broken. Sophia grieved too, but privately, carrying the weight of missing him like a physical ache in her chest. She'd lie awake at night, remembering the sound of his laugh, the feel of his hands, the way he'd made her feel cherished and protected and worthy of love. But every memory was now complicated by knowledge, every moment of happiness shadowed by the question of motivation. Had he loved her, or had he loved the idea of redeeming Elena's sacrifice? Had she been his salvation, or just his penance? 3 months into their separation, both Marcus and Sophia had constructed new lives that felt hollow and purposeless, like stage sets designed to look normal from a distance, but lacking any real substance upon closer inspection. Sophia had thrown herself into nursing school with the desperate intensity of someone trying to outrun her own thoughts. She'd been accepted into an accelerated program in Boston, a decision that required moving Maya away from familiar doctors and support systems, but offered the promise of a fresh start. The coursework was demanding enough to fill her days completely, leaving little time for the kind of introspection that led to regret and second-guessing. She excelled in her studies with the same fierce determination she'd applied to everything else in her life. Her professors noted her unusual dedication, her intuitive understanding of patient care, her ability to remain calm and competent in crisis situations. But her classmates noticed that she never smiled anymore, never joined study groups or social events, never talked about her life outside the hospital. Maya's adjustment to Boston was more difficult. At 16, she was stronger physically than she'd been in years, but emotionally she was struggling with the loss of Marcus from their lives. She missed his quiet presence, his terrible jokes, his way of listening to her stories about school and friends as if they were the most important news he'd ever heard. "You're punishing all of us for something that wasn't anyone's fault," Maya said one evening as they sat in their small apartment near the nursing school. "Elena chose to save us. Marcus chose to love you. You're choosing to throw it all away because you're scared." "It's not about being scared," Sophia replied, though her voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Maya challenged. "You've spent your whole life taking care of me, making sure I had everything I needed, putting my needs before your own. And the moment someone wanted to take care of you for a change, you ran." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to hurt. Sophia had built her identity around being Maya's protector, around being strong and independent and self-sufficient. Accepting Marcus's love meant accepting vulnerability, accepting that she needed someone, accepting that her carefully constructed walls might not be necessary anymore. Meanwhile, in New York, Marcus had become a ghost in his own life. Reed Innovations continued to function under the leadership of his executive team, but without his driving vision and passionate involvement, the company felt rudderless. Board meetings happened without him, product launches proceeded without his input, quarterly reports were filed without his review. Richard Blackwood and the other board members initially celebrated what they saw as a return to sanity. Their CEO was no longer distracted by an inappropriate relationship, no longer making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. But as weeks turned into months and Marcus remained disengaged from everything that had once mattered to him, they began to worry about the company's future. "He's not the same man," Blackwood confided to another board member. "Whatever happened with that girl broke something in him that I don't think can be fixed." Marcus spent his days reading, walking through Central Park, visiting Elena's grave. He had conversations with her headstone that felt more real than any interaction he had with living people. He told Elena about Sophia and Maya, about the love he'd found and lost, about the cosmic cruelty of their connection. "I don't know what you want from me," he said during one of these one-sided conversations. "I don't know if loving them honors your memory or betrays it. I don't know if letting them go is noble or cowardly. I need you to tell me what to do." But graves don't offer guidance, and the dead don't provide easy answers to the moral complexities of the living. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Maya's therapist, Dr. Sarah Kingston, who'd been treating trauma survivors for over 20 years and had developed an intuitive understanding of how grief and guilt could masquerade as love, and how love could be mistaken for obligation. During one of Maya's sessions, 6 months after Marcus's departure from their lives, Dr. Kingston asked a question that changed everything. "If Eleanor Reed were sitting in this room right now," she said to Maya, "what do you think she would want for her husband?" Maya considered the question seriously. She'd spent months researching Elena, reading articles about her work, looking at photos from hospital events and charity functions. Elena had been beautiful and brilliant and kind, the sort of person who radiated warmth even in formal photographs. "I think she'd want him to be happy," Maya said finally. "I think she'd want him to live, not just survive." "And what do you think she'd want for you and your sister?" "The same thing," Maya said, understanding dawning in her voice. "She died so we could live. She'd probably be furious if she knew we were wasting the life she gave us." Dr. Kingston nodded. "Trauma has a way of convincing us that we don't deserve good things, that happiness is somehow disrespectful to those we've lost. But honoring someone's sacrifice doesn't mean living in perpetual suffering. It means making their sacrifice worthwhile." That evening, Maya called Sophia with new determination in her voice. "I'm going to write to Marcus," she announced without preamble. "Maya, no," Sophia said immediately. "We've talked about this. It's over. It has to be over." "Why does it have to be over?" Maya challenged. "Because you're afraid? Because it's complicated? Because loving someone who's connected to our trauma feels wrong?" "Because it is wrong," Sophia said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Says who?" Maya demanded. "Elena saved my life so I could live it, not so I could spend it feeling guilty about being alive. And if she loved Marcus enough to marry him, don't you think she'd want him to find love again?" The question hung between them like a challenge Sophia wasn't ready to accept. Maya found Elena's final letter to Marcus through old news coverage of the accident's first anniversary. A human interest story had mentioned the letter's contents, quoting the family's permission to share Elena's final words as a testament to love's enduring power. The letter had been found in Elena's purse after the accident, apparently written earlier that day as she prepared for their anniversary dinner. The published excerpts took Sophia's breath away. "My darling Marcus, if something ever happens to me, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll live. Not just exist, not just go through the motions, but really live. Find someone who makes you laugh, who challenges you, who sees all the goodness in you that I see. Love doesn't diminish when it's shared, it multiplies. My love for you won't be lessened by your love for someone else. It will be honored by it. Don't let my death be the end of your story. Let it be the beginning of a new chapter." Maya read the letter to Sophia over the phone, her voice breaking on the final words. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility and pain. "She knew," Sophia whispered. "She knew he might find someone else, and she wanted him to." "She wanted him to be happy," Maya said, "just like he makes you happy, just like you make him happy. The only people standing in the way of that happiness are you and Marcus, and you're both too scared to admit that love can grow from tragedy without dishonoring the past." For the first time in months, Sophia allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be loved by Marcus Reed. Not the complicated guilt and obligation she'd convinced herself motivated him, but the simple truth of being cherished by someone who saw her completely and chose her anyway. "What if I'm wrong about his motivations?" Sophia asked quietly. "What if he really does love me for me, and I've thrown away something beautiful because I was too afraid to believe I deserved it?" "Then you fix it," Maya said simply. "You go back to New York, you find him, and you figure out how to build something real together." "It can't be that simple." "Love usually is," Maya replied. "It's people who make it complicated." The decision to return to New York came to Sophia gradually, like dawn breaking over a landscape she'd thought was permanently shrouded in darkness. It started with small admissions, that she missed Marcus with an intensity that felt like physical pain, that the life they'd built together had been the happiest period of her adult life, that fear had motivated her decision to leave more than wisdom or self-protection. Maya's words had planted seeds that grew into uncomfortable realizations. Sophia had spent years taking care of everyone else, defining herself through service and sacrifice and the careful management of other people's needs. When Marcus had offered to care for her in return, to shoulder some of her burdens and offer her the luxury of being vulnerable, she'd panicked. "I've been afraid of being loved," she admitted to her reflection one morning as she prepared for clinical rotations. "Not because I don't deserve it, but because accepting it means admitting I need someone, and I've built my whole identity around not needing anyone." The nursing program had taught her about different types of healing: physical, emotional, spiritual. She'd learned to recognize the signs of trauma in patients, to understand how pain could masquerade as strength, and how isolation could feel safer than connection. But it had taken months of separation from Marcus to realize she was exhibiting the same patterns she'd been trained to identify in others. Elena's letter, shared by Maya and confirmed through her own research, had been the final piece of understanding Sophia needed. Elena hadn't just given permission for Marcus to love again, she'd requested it. The woman who died saving Maya's life had wanted her husband to find happiness, to build new love on the foundation of their shared past rather than being imprisoned by it. "She brought us together," Sophia said aloud, testing the words. "Elena's sacrifice saved Maya, which led us to the hospital, which led us to Marcus. It wasn't cosmic cruelty, it was cosmic grace." Meanwhile, Marcus had begun his own journey toward understanding, though his path was lonelier and more painful. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the grief counselor Elena had insisted he see after her death, had finally convinced him to return to therapy after months of concerned phone calls from his assistant. "You're not betraying Elena by loving someone else," Dr. Warren said during one of their sessions. "You're honoring her by allowing yourself to live fully again." "But Sophia was right," Marcus said, slumped in the leather chair that had become familiar over the past month. "Part of my attraction to them was motivated by guilt. Part of me did see helping them as a way to honor Elena's sacrifice." "And that makes your feelings less real? How?" Dr. Warren asked. "Human emotions are complex, Marcus. Love can grow from gratitude, healing can spring from guilt, and genuine affection can develop from initially mixed motivations. The question isn't whether your feelings started pure, it's whether they grew into something authentic." Marcus spent weeks examining his memories of Sophia, dissecting his motivations and reactions with the thoroughness he'd once applied to business problems. Yes, guilt had initially drawn him to help them. Yes, part of him had seen their connection as a way to make Elena's death meaningful. But the love that had grown between them felt separate from those origins, real and powerful and transformative in ways that had nothing to do with obligation. "I fell in love with her laugh," he told Dr. Warren, "with the way she reads Maya bedtime stories even though Maya's 16, with how she puts 3 sugars in her coffee but orders it black because she thinks sugar is frivolous, with her terrible taste in movies and her brilliant insights about people and the way she makes everyone around her feel important." "That sounds like love to me," Dr. Warren said gently. "But what if she can't separate my feelings from the circumstances that brought us together? What if she'll always see Elena's ghost when she looks at me?" "Then you'll have to decide if love is worth the risk of being hurt," Dr. Warren replied. "But you can't make that decision for her. You can only decide whether you're brave enough to try." The breakthrough came when Marcus finally read the rest of Elena's letter, the parts that hadn't been published, the private words she'd written just for him. He'd been carrying the letter unopened for 5 years, too afraid of her final thoughts to face them directly. But grief counseling had given him tools for processing pain, and love had given him motivation to be braver than his fear. Elena's handwriting was elegant and familiar, her words full of the warmth and wisdom that had made her an extraordinary doctor and an extraordinary wife. My darling Marcus, the letter began, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and I need you to know some things while my voice is still clear in your mind. First, I love you with a completeness that astounds me. You've made me happier than I ever thought possible, and every day with you has been a gift I never took for granted. Second, if I'm gone, it means I was trying to help someone. You know I can't stand by when people are suffering, can't resist trying to fix what's broken. Please don't let my desire to help others become a source of guilt for you. Whatever happened, whatever choices I made, they were mine to make. Third, and most importantly, I need you to promise me you'll live. Not just exist, not just go through the motions, but really, truly live. Find someone who makes you laugh, who challenges you, who sees all the goodness in you that I see. Love her completely and without reservation. Let her love you the same way. I know you'll feel guilty about moving on, will worry that new love somehow diminishes what we had. But love doesn't work that way, my darling. Love multiplies rather than divides. Your love for someone new won't take anything away from what we shared. It will be a testament to your capacity for connection, to the lessons I tried to teach you about opening your heart. Promise me you won't let my death be the end of your story. Let it be the beginning of a new chapter, one where you honor what we had by building something new and beautiful with someone who deserves all the love you have to give. I'll be watching over you, cheering you on, grateful for every moment of happiness you allow yourself to experience. All my love, always and forever, Elena. Marcus read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. Elena hadn't just given him permission to love again, she'd made it a dying wish. She'd known him well enough to predict his guilt, his hesitation, his tendency to honor the past by refusing to embrace the future. Armed with Elena's blessing and his own hard-won understanding of his motivations, Marcus began planning his approach to winning Sophia back. But he knew that grand gestures and expensive gifts wouldn't be enough. He needed to prove that his love was real, that his commitment was genuine, that their connection transcended the tragic circumstances that had brought them together. He started by creating the Elena Reed Foundation for Trauma Survivors, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families navigate the medical, financial, and emotional challenges that followed serious accidents. The foundation would provide not just financial assistance, but comprehensive support services, counseling, advocacy, practical assistance with insurance and legal issues. But more than that, Marcus structured the foundation to operate independently of his personal involvement. He hired a professional staff, established an endowment that would fund operations in perpetuity, created oversight systems that would ensure the foundation's mission continued regardless of his personal circumstances. "This isn't about me," he explained to the foundation's first board meeting. "This isn't about easing my guilt or honoring my wife's memory through charity. This is about creating systematic change in how trauma survivors are supported, about building something that will outlast all of us and help thousands of families who face what Elena faced, what Maya and Sophia faced." The Foundation's first initiative was to fund a comprehensive study of long-term trauma recovery, examining not just medical outcomes but psychological, social, and economic factors that affected healing. Marcus, wanting to understand the full scope of what families like Sophia's endured, wanted to create solutions that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. But he also made a more personal decision that required greater courage than any business venture he'd ever undertaken. He decided to go to Boston. Sophia had been in nursing school for 8 months when she received a call from Maya's former physical therapist in New York. "There's something you should know," Patricia said without preamble. "Marcus Reed has created a foundation, the Elena Reed Foundation. It's going to help families like yours, families dealing with trauma recovery." Sophia felt her chest tighten. That's good. Maya will be happy to hear that." "There's more," Patricia continued. "He's not just throwing money at the problem. He's created something sustainable, something that will help people long after he's gone. And Sophia? He's never mentioned you or Maya by name. Whatever he's doing it quietly, without publicity, without using your story to promote himself." After hanging up, Sophia found herself researching the foundation online. The website was professional and comprehensive, outlining services for trauma survivors that went far beyond what any individual charity typically offered. There were photos from the launch event, Marcus looking older and more tired than she remembered, but speaking passionately about the need for systematic support for families facing medical trauma. "The goal isn't to fix people," he was quoted as saying. "The goal is to give them the tools and support they need to fix themselves, to rebuild their lives on their own terms." Sophia stared at the computer screen for a long time, remembering the man who'd sat beside her in a hospital waiting room and offered comfort without asking for anything in return. Marcus arrived in Boston on a Tuesday morning in November, 8 months after he'd last seen Sophia's face. He didn't announce his arrival, didn't call ahead or arrange a meeting. Instead, he went to the nursing school where she was completing her clinical rotations and waited. He sat in the same type of plastic chair where they'd first met, in another hospital waiting room, reading the same type of outdated magazines and drinking the same terrible coffee. The symmetry felt intentional, like the universe offering them a chance to begin again where they'd started. Sophia emerged from the pediatric ward after a 12-hour shift, exhausted and emotionally drained from caring for a young patient who reminded her painfully of Maya at that age. She was thinking about nothing except getting home to sleep when she saw him. Marcus looked older, she noticed. There were new lines around his eyes, silver threading more prominently through his dark hair. But when he looked up and saw her, his face transformed with relief and hope and love so obvious it took her breath away. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Learning to be brave," Marcus replied, standing slowly. "Learning that some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight terrifies you." They stood there in the bustling hospital corridor, other staff members and visitors flowing around them like water around stones, both afraid to move closer and afraid to move away. "I read about the foundation," Sophia said finally. "It's not about us," Marcus said quickly. "It's not about guilt or obligation or trying to win you back. It's about doing something useful with resources I don't deserve and creating lasting change instead of temporary fixes." "I know," Sophia said softly. "I can see that. The way you've structured it, the services you're providing, it's not about personal redemption. It's about systematic healing." Marcus felt something ease in his chest. "You understand. I understand that you've learned the difference between helping people to ease your own pain and helping people because it's the right thing to do," Sophia said. "I understand that you've figured out how to honor Elena's memory without being imprisoned by it." They walked to the hospital cafeteria without discussing it, drawn by muscle memory to find a quiet corner where they could talk without interruption. The coffee was as terrible as it had been in New York, but somehow it tasted like coming home. "I've been in therapy," Marcus said without preamble, "learning about grief and guilt and the difference between loving someone because you need them and loving someone because you choose them." "And what have you learned?" Sophia asked. "That I love you," Marcus said simply. "Not because Elena died saving Maya, not because I feel obligated to take care of you, not because helping you makes me feel better about surviving when she didn't. I love you because you're brilliant and fierce and funny and kind. I love you because you see good in broken things, because you fight for what matters, because you make me want to be better than I've been." Sophia felt tears starting to form. "Marcus, I love the way you read medical journals like they're novels," he continued. "I love how you steal extra blankets for elderly patients when you think no one's looking. I love that you know every nurse's name and remember their children's birthdays and somehow make everyone around you feel important." "Stop," Sophia whispered, but she didn't really want him to stop. "I love that you put 3 sugars in your coffee but order it black because you think sweetness is frivolous. I love your terrible taste in movies and your brilliant insights about people and the way you make Maya feel like the most important person in the world while still pushing her to be independent. Marcus, please. I love you, he said again, reaching across the table to take her hands. I love you separate from our circumstances, separate from Elena's sacrifice, separate from everything that brought us together. I love you for who you are, not for who you represent or what loving you might mean about my capacity for healing. Sophia looked down at their joined hands, noting that he was no longer wearing his wedding ring. When did you take it off? 6 months ago, Marcus said, when I finally understood that honoring Elena's memory didn't require staying frozen in grief. When I realized that she'd want me to love you completely, without reservation, without the barrier of guilt between us. I've been afraid, Sophia admitted quietly, afraid that accepting your love meant admitting I needed saving. Afraid that being happy somehow dishonored my parents' deaths or made Maya's suffering meaningless. And now? Sophia looked up, meeting his dark eyes directly. Now I think I understand what Elena was trying to tell you in that letter. Love doesn't diminish when it's shared. It multiplies. Healing doesn't dishonor loss. It transforms it into something that can help others heal. Marcus felt his heart start beating properly for the first time in 8 months. Does that mean? It means I love you too, Sophia said, her voice stronger now. It means I'm tired of being afraid of happiness. It means I want to build something real with you, something that honors the past without being imprisoned by it. Even though people will still judge us for the age difference, even though our love story is complicated and messy and built on tragedy, especially because of that, Sophia said, the best love stories aren't simple, Marcus. They're the ones where people choose each other despite the complications, where love grows strong enough to transform pain into purpose. Their second first kiss happened in the same hospital cafeteria where they'd shared so many conversations. But this time, it was witnessed by dozens of medical staff and visitors who saw something beautiful instead of something scandalous. When they broke apart, both were crying and laughing and holding each other like they were afraid the other might disappear. I want to come home, Sophia said against his lips. I want to finish my degree in New York. I want Maya to have her medical team back. I want us to build a life together that makes Elena proud. Are you sure? Marcus asked. Are you sure you can look at me without seeing guilt and obligation? Are you sure you can love me without reservation? I'm sure, Sophia said firmly, because I've learned the difference between loving someone because you're grateful to them and loving someone because they make your world brighter. Because I've realized that accepting love doesn't make me weak. It makes me brave enough to be vulnerable. Marcus kissed her again, deeper this time, with 8 months of longing and regret and hope poured into the connection between them. Around them, the hospital continued its endless rhythm, but they existed in a bubble where second chances were possible and love could indeed grow from tragedy without dishonoring the past. Maya's going to be so happy, Sophia said when they finally came up for air. She's missed you terribly. She's been telling everyone who'll listen that her sister is an idiot for letting you go. Smart kid, Marcus said with a smile. I've missed her too. I've missed both of you more than I thought it was possible to miss anything. What happens now? Sophia asked. Now we go home, Marcus said. All of us. We figure out how to blend our lives together, how to build something new while honoring what came before. We learn how to be a family. A family, Sophia repeated, testing the word. It felt right, felt possible in ways it never had before. If you want that, Marcus said quickly, if you're ready for that level of commitment. I want that, Sophia said without hesitation. I want everything with you. The complicated parts, the simple parts, the healing and the growing, and the building something beautiful together. They left the hospital hand in hand, walking into the Boston evening with 8 months of separation behind them and the rest of their lives ahead of them. There would be challenges still, integrating their lives, dealing with continued public scrutiny, navigating the complex emotions that came with building love on a foundation of loss. But they were no longer facing those challenges alone. 2 years later, Marcus and Sophia stood in the chapel at St. Mary's Hospital, the same building where their love story had begun, surrounded by the people who had watched them transform individual grief into shared healing. Maya, now 18 and headed to art school on a full scholarship, served as Sophia's maid of honor, her speech bringing tears to everyone present. 5 years ago, a woman named Elena Reed made a choice that saved my life, Maya said, her voice strong and clear. She didn't know me, didn't know my family, but she chose to sacrifice herself so we could live. For a long time, Sophia and I thought that meant we had to live carefully, quietly, like we owed the world our sadness as payment for surviving. She paused, looking at Marcus and Sophia with love and gratitude. But Marcus taught us that the best way to honor a sacrifice is to make it worthwhile. Elena didn't save my life so I could spend it feeling guilty about being alive. She saved it so I could live fully, love completely, create beautiful things, and help other people heal. The wedding was small and intimate, with Elena's photo displayed alongside fresh flowers near the altar. Her presence felt blessing rather than haunting. Love, rather than loss, transformed into something that could celebrate new beginnings without forgetting what had come before. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who had carried the weight of their secret for so long, gave a reading about love's infinite capacity to heal and transform. Love doesn't replace love, she said, looking directly at Marcus and Sophia. It multiplies love. It transforms tragedy into purpose, loss into wisdom, pain into the kind of strength that can help others heal. The Elena Reed Foundation had helped hundreds of families in its first 2 years of operation, providing not just financial assistance, but comprehensive support services that addressed the full scope of trauma recovery. Marcus and Sophia both served on the board, but the foundation operated independently, driven by professional staff and systematic processes rather than personal guilt or obligation. We learned that healing isn't about forgetting, Sophia said during her wedding vows. It's about integrating loss into love, about building something new that honors what came before without being imprisoned by it. Elena's sacrifice brought us together, but our choice to love each other completely, without reservation, without the barriers of guilt or fear, that's what keeps us together. Marcus's vows were simpler, but no less profound. You taught me the difference between existing and living, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You taught me that love is brave enough to grow in impossible circumstances, strong enough to transform tragedy into purpose, generous enough to honor the past while building the future. 3 years after their wedding, the Reed family, as they were now known, had created a life that felt both miraculous and ordinary. Maya had thrived in art school, her talent blossoming into installations that explored themes of survival, resilience, and the beauty that could emerge from brokenness. Her work was exhibited in galleries across the country, with proceeds benefiting the Elena Reed Foundation. Sophia had completed her nursing degree and specialized in trauma recovery, working with families facing circumstances similar to what she and Maya had endured. Her combination of professional training and personal experience made her uniquely effective at helping people navigate the complex emotions that accompanied medical crisis and loss. Marcus had returned to active leadership of Reed Innovations, but his approach to business had been transformed by his experience with loss and recovery. The company now focused primarily on healthcare technology, developing systems that could improve patient outcomes and support families during medical crises. But the most profound change was in how Marcus approached life itself. He'd learned to be present for joy instead of always preparing for loss, to celebrate good moments instead of waiting for them to be taken away, to love fully and openly without the protective barriers he'd once thought were necessary for survival. "Do you ever wonder what Alina would think of us now?" Sophia asked one evening as they walked through Central Park, following the same path Marcus had walked alone for 5 years after his wife's death. "I think she'd be proud," Marcus said, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "I think she'd be happy that her sacrifice led to so much healing, so much love, so much life being lived fully instead of just survived." They paused at the bench where Marcus used to sit when the grief felt too heavy to carry standing up. Now it was just a place to rest and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. "I used to sit here and feel like I was betraying her memory by still being alive," Marcus said quietly. "Now I sit here and feel grateful for every day I get to love you. Every day I get to watch Maya become the extraordinary woman she's destined to be. Every day I get to do work that matters." "She would have loved Maya," Sophia said with certainty. "She would have loved watching her paint, listening to her stories, seeing her transform pain into art." "She would have loved you," Marcus replied. "Your strength, your fierce protectiveness, your ability to see hope even in impossible circumstances. You're exactly the kind of person Elena was drawn to. Someone who makes the world brighter just by being in it." Above them, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. 5 years ago, Marcus had looked at those same stars and felt only emptiness, only the absence of everything that had given his life meaning. Now he looked at them and saw infinite possibility, infinite reasons to be grateful for the gift of still being alive to love and be loved. "Some secrets destroy us," Sophia said, echoing words she'd spoken years earlier. "But ours saved us all." "It saved us because we were brave enough to face it," Marcus replied. "Because we chose love over fear, healing over bitterness, the future over the past." As they walked home together, their footsteps echoing on the paths where Marcus had once walked alone, they carried with them the knowledge that love could indeed grow from the most impossible circumstances, that tragedy could be transformed into purpose, loss into wisdom, pain into the kind of strength that could heal not just individuals but entire communities. Elena's sacrifice had saved Maya's life, which had led Sophia to Marcus, which had created a love story that proved healing was possible even in the wake of devastating loss. The foundation they'd built together would help thousands of families facing similar circumstances, turning one woman's heroic choice into a legacy of hope and healing that would ripple forward through generations. Behind them, the city sparkled with lights and life and the endless possibility of love finding ways to flourish even in the most unlikely soil. And somewhere in that tapestry of light and shadow, Elena Reed's spirit lived on, not as a ghost haunting the past, but as a blessing illuminating the future, proof that love truly was infinite, transformative, and eternal. In the end, their love story wasn't about replacing what had been lost. It was about discovering that the human heart's capacity for love was limitless, that healing was always possible, and that the most beautiful flowers often grew in the richest soil, soil that had been nourished by tears, seasoned by sacrifice, and blessed by the kind of love that transcends even death itself. The secret that had threatened to destroy them had ultimately saved them all, because they'd been brave enough to face the truth and wise enough to understand that love doesn't diminish when it's shared. It multiplies, creating ripples of healing that extend far beyond the original circle of those who dared to love despite the risks, to hope despite the pain, to choose connection despite the possibility of loss. And in that choice, to love fully, to heal completely, to transform tragedy into triumph, they'd found not just their own salvation, but a way to honor every sacrifice that had made their love possible.
Your heart knows the way. Subscribe and follow the beauty.